Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast for this Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen. It's what we talk about each and every week here. We've been doing this podcast specifically for a year now. And we have some rather exciting announcements for you in regards to the formatting of this podcast. Now, if you've stuck with me now for the last couple of years, and more specifically the last couple of months, we've announced to you that we have some specific goals and objectives, some things we want to accomplish in 2025 as a community. This community has grown beyond what I could ever have imagined when I started making videos in my Ford Flex at lunchtime, on my lunch break, at my job over 2 years ago. My, how things have changed, but we're a growing community, and we are a powerful community poised to make significant change. And we've got some objectives for this year. If you missed the article at onthepen.com, we sort of laid these out. But a lot more advocacy this year in the way of accessibility, advocating for accessibility, expanded accessibility for our government, our federal government, to take the obesity epidemic as seriously as we took the COVID pandemic, because this affects so many people and greatly affects the entire country, the entire culture, the entire economy. And we need to start taking it very seriously. There are medicines that can treat obesity, and we need to be advocating for them. So Operation Warp Speed Obesity, we've gone into all of it, and I won't rehash it. But in the spirit of aligning the podcast with those objectives, I want to announce just a few changes to the formatting here moving forward. Hopefully it's not too earth-shattering, but I want to basically jettison this idea that this has to be a 15 to 20-minute podcast every week. There's just so much to get into each and every week, and I don't want to minimize the content at the expense of things that we could be covering that could be helpful for the community and for these goals. So getting away from the 15 to 20 minute format is something that we'll be focusing on here. The other thing is, you may have noticed the last couple of weeks we've been doing the podcast live. We've been doing it live here. We're going to be doing the podcast live every Tuesday at noon Central Time. So the podcast will air on your podcast avenue of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You'll still get it there, but the actual recording will be done live here on YouTube, Facebook, and X, and the audio will be shared later in the day to the respective podcast platforms. The other sort of change that we're going to be implementing is the content that we cover. Now, in the past, it has been covering whatever is in the news that I feel like is newsworthy for that week. I want to drill in a little bit more on the specific topics that I find important for advocacy. So we'll have some of the legacy topics that we've always discussed here. We will have, obviously, the current medication and whatever news is in the rotation about current medication. We'll cover future medications. I think those are two topics that are just always important to be covering at On the Pen. But we're also going to be adding a section into the podcast that touches on advocacy and policy, things that really impact things like accessibility to these medications. That is in alignment with our objectives for 2025. And then the other one is sort of like a by popular demand segment. I want to talk a little bit weekly just about some basic investor news. There's so many of you who follow on the pen for reasons other than your own personal journey. Many of you are people who are just trying to keep your fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the industry. And what has definitely evolved over the last couple of years is the fact that On the Pen has become somewhat of an industry insider. We just have connections with so many different people within the space, whether we're talking about the compounding world, the telehealth world, the pharmaceutical world, and hopefully in 2025, the political world. That's like our next sort of frontier that we're focusing on in 2025. I just wanted to bring in something for folks that are watching specifically for investor related information. So we're going to just add a little something, and we're not going to be labored every week, but adding a little something for our friends who are here for investor news. So we've got a little bit of each of those to get into today. I'm super excited, but I want to welcome in everyone who is watching live today. Put live in the chat if you're watching live. I want to say hello to Lori, Debbie, Sue the Dude, Clara, Julie, DJ. I want to say hi to Mindy, to Neo, to Lynn K. I want to say hi to Thelma, and I want to say hi to Sabrina, who hosted our first ever Friday night live GLP-1 panel discussion, Beyond the Scale with Sabrina. That's going to be a every other Friday night, I think. Sabrina can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're shooting for about every other Friday. So this week off, next week back on. And I have just gotten such tremendous feedback on that. So if you're here as part of, just getting support for your journey, that is something that we've added here at On the Pen for you, those every other Friday night lives. Check out the one from last week. It was just absolutely spectacular. So many different perspectives. And, I was, always kind of skeptical about how a panel that big could work, but Sabrina has really come up with a really awesome way to keep that conversation moving forward in a productive way. It's not like people are stepping on each other and trying to speak. Just a really great format that Sabrina has put on and brought it to On the Pen. Super excited for that. So thank you, Sabrina, for that. If you check that out, drop it in the comments. Let us know what you thought about that. I felt like that was a huge success, and I'm looking forward to that growing here at On the Pen. Now let's get into the news. And before we do, I want to thank our sponsors, Row, who have been sponsors with us now for over 6 months. And Row allows this to happen. One of the things that we focused on in 2024 was just monetizing. I have to have a way to pay the bills. I am a dad, a father of 4. And so that's just an important, it's an unfortunate part of this, but it's a reality of it. And so Row allows that to happen. And so I want to thank Row, our sponsor. Row, of course, has the Row Body program where patients get involved with Row through their amazing telehealth platform, get connected with doctors who can prescribe GLP-1 medications, couple that with lifestyle modifications when this is all appropriate medically, and patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year on average on the Row Body program. You can learn more about it at row.co/OTP for On the Pen. If you're going to visit their website, make sure you hit row.co/OTP. Of course, there's always potential side effects when starting any medication. So familiarize yourself with all of that. Learn everything you need to know about the medications, the Row Body program at row.co/OTP. Within a couple of clicks, you're going to be able to find just about every piece of information you could ever want. It's a great website and it's a wonderful app. And I thank our sponsors, Row, for helping make this happen every week. But let's get into the news. What happened this week? Well, in the news of current medications, there's really never a shortage of any information to talk about. But one of the things that I found really interesting was that Novo Nordisk actually is facing some criticism over in the United Kingdom. So Novo Nordisk, obviously, for those who are unaware, are the makers of Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, soon to be CagriSema. They actually failed to disclose, this is according to a watchdog over there, 1.2 million euros in payments to healthcare and patient organizations, and 635,000 euros worth of payments were made to newly identified people, despite the company's previous voluntary disclosing of $609,000 in 2023. So some shortcomings in their actual reporting of what they're basically paying towards patient advocacy groups or doctors. These are things that we need a ton of transparency in. So in 2023, Novo Nordisk admitted to not disclosing 7.8 million euros in payments to over 150 organizations across 3 years. The misattribution of funds also occurred, such as 338,000 euros incorrectly listed as paid to the World Obesity Federation. Now, the Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority, the PMCPA, stated that this raises concerns about Novo Nordisk's company culture and governance. And the experts criticize the lack of transparency, calling for a total overhaul of the United Kingdom's pharmaceutical industry practices. Now, this is specific to the United Kingdom, but I think it's worth noting, because when pharmaceutical companies have influence, especially undisclosed influence, on the people who prescribe these medicines, how can you ever be certain that the information that you're getting is actually accurate and not sponsored in part by companies like Novo Nordisk? So I felt like this was huge, a huge deal, and obviously interested to hear from our friends in the UK as to what their opinions are on this. In Novo Nordisk's defense, they claim to have implemented measures to improve tracking and disclosure of all these payments moving forward, and they committed to ensuring accurate reporting of future transfers of value. But this obviously raises some red flags to many. Let me know what you think in the comments of this video. So let's check out future medications this week. We heard some really interesting news on a company called Aardvark Therapeutics. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Aardvark Therapeutics. This was a new one to me. So Aardvark Therapeutics has a molecule called ARD-101. It is a first in class, so the first of its kind oral small molecule drug that's been developed to target metabolic diseases, inflammation, and a rare genetic condition called Prader-Willi syndrome, PWS. Now, Prader-Williams syndrome was a new one for me. I had to look this one up. It affects 1 in 15,000 births and is a neurodevelopment disorder that is confirmed by DNA testing. One of the hallmarks of Prader-Willi syndrome is excessive hunger during childhood. This sort of rears its head during childhood, and the only way to control that to date is basically controlling access to food for children. So what Aardvark Therapeutics is looking at is the development of ARD-101 to not only help treat obesity in both patients living with obesity who have and who have not had bariatric surgery, but for patients living with this rare genetic condition, Prader-Willi syndrome. So let's talk a little bit about how it works, because this is interesting, because this is unlike other things that we've seen. So ARD-101 is gut restricted and activates the body's natural gut peptide hormones, including GLP-1, GLP-2. Yes, there is a GLP-2, and cholecytokinin. CCK, right? Cholecystokinin. Somebody can pronounce that a lot better than I can. Through the bitter taste receptor agonism, the TAS2R. So activating not only your body's ability to produce GLP-1 and GLP-2. GLP-2 has been explored. There's actually a GLP-2 on the market. It actually treats a rare condition of gut, a rare gut condition. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there is actually a GLP-2 medication on the market. It has been for some time. But this one also targets the bitter taste receptor. So the CCK activation, unlike other treatments, ARD-101 stimulates the release of natural CCK, which is a hormone that reduces hunger by signaling satiety through the vagal nerve. And so a totally different pathway than anything that we've seen before targeting hunger suppression. It focuses specifically on the hunger axis, reducing the negative sensation that drives the need to eat. The nice thing about ARD-101 is that it avoids systemic exposure, reducing the common side effects like nausea, diarrhea, some of those things that we see very commonly with just GLP-1 medications alone. So this is an interesting one, ARD-101. It is a distinct and unique molecule from Aardvark Therapeutics, and this will definitely be one that we want to watch. moving forward, as this could potentially offer another level of appetite suppression through another what we call pathway of treating obesity. So just amazing news from Aardvark Therapeutics. I hope that you'll check them out over the course of the next couple of weeks here. Want to get into some other interesting news. Now, this is sort of where our policy and advocacy stuff meets. There's so much going on right now with the change of administration, so much that we could unpack here, and trying to sort of boil this down into what impacts our community specifically is one of the things that is sort of a challenge. And I want to be very delicate, because I feel like anything that we cover that is politically driven here can be an absolute minefield. And so I'm going to be delicate here, but the change of the administration, lots of crazy stuff going on, trying to boil this down into what is meaningful and impactful for the community. So let's try to do this without stepping on any minds. The first thing I want to talk about is how the Trump administration has actually put sort of a moratorium on the Health and Human Services, the FDA, and the CDC from basically having external communication right now. And it's not unprecedented. Sort of looking back into this, it's not a completely unprecedented move. Other administrations, including the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, have done similar things. I believe the Obama administration had to do with the H1N1 outbreak and sort of wanting to control sort of the information that was coming out of Washington, D.C. The Clinton administration, to my knowledge, was more about policy changes that were happening around insurance at the time, and they wanted to be able to sort of control the narrative from the administration standpoint. I don't know what this is about, and won't hypothesize what this is about from the Trump administration, but one of the interesting things that has been rattling around in my brain is how does this affect the semaglutide shortages, right? Because one of the things that we have been waiting on in this community is what's going on with the shortages of semaglutide. Semaglutide is basically a drug that has been reported to be commercially available currently. And since it's been reported to be commercially available, essentially what we have is waiting on the FDA to say whether this medication is off of shortage officially, right? Now that the FDA can't communicate externally, what is the implication? So sort of looking into this and unpacking it very quickly for you, it sounds like the Trump administration has basically become the filter. They want somebody who was elected and appointed by the president to be able to basically be the pass-through for any information that flows through these agencies to the external world right now. And so it's not that they cannot say anything, it's that has to be funneled through the administration. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with how this all impacts the shortages. It'll be interesting to see how this impacts clinical trials that are going on right now. All very interesting stuff. Now, the other thing that's happening from a policy standpoint this week coming up is the nomination hearings for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is basically the Trump nominee to take over Health and Human Services. So that'll be tomorrow. We will be watching that very closely to see what happens with that nomination, because one of the things that we heard over the last 24 hours was a report that RFK Jr. has signaled that he is open to the idea of the federal government seizing drug patents and allowing basically other companies to make generic versions so that they can ease the cost of medication. Another thing that sort of came out today also in reading some of the news stories was that President Trump is actually pushing Eli Lilly to increase the cost of tirzepatide overseas to help lower the cost of tirzepatide branded over here in the United States. So these are all very interesting things to consider right now. We will be following all this very closely over the next days and weeks, and obviously topics that we're going to get into in depth here as we attempt to cover all the things that matter to this community. Now, the last thing I want to get into today is Metera. So in sort of some investor news, Metera is a company that we talked about over the last couple of days. They are targeting an IPO, an initial public offering. So they're going public, targeting a $1.78 billion valuation, offering 17.9 million shares at roughly $15 to $17 each. So it's a once monthly GLP-1 that beat all the current treatments in a 13-week trial. Patients on Met097I, the high dose, lost 11% of their body weight in just 13 weeks. Now, equally as exciting, I think, from Metera is the fact that they have two other very intriguing things in the works. Met233I, which is actually a long-acting amylin agonist that is designed to take once monthly, that could be paired with Met097I to even increase the efficacy of that medication. And then they have an oral peptide platform called Momentum. So think snack technology from Novo Nordisk. It is basically a way to allow people to take NUSH medications, which are nutrient stimulated hormone medications, often peptides, and have them be bioavailable. Peptide, long chain peptides, like these medications that we talk about on this channel, are destroyed by stomach acid. So they have to basically, they have to have a technology added to them to basically protect the peptide through the stomach acid so that it is absorbed in the digestive tract and can work appropriately. SNAC is the technology that Novo Nordisk has developed for Rybelsus, and the oral version of all of these medications that are to come are either small molecule or very high dose peptides. Because of all this, now you see another company in Metera developing a program called Momentum that will allow these oral peptides to be bioavailable. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. That should be going public soon. Again, $15 to $17 per share at a initial valuation of $1.78 billion. We will have to check them out. That's what we got for you this week. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. Couldn't, shouldn't, and wouldn't do it without you. I appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you on the next one.